Um, Thank you.
And so is
Uh,
the idea on option 1 and 2, we won't have an individual like audience dashboard grayed out with enable and individual behavior. We would have a product analytics single line item that would then be replaced with the pre-configured dashboards.
yeah, because you couldn't have, I guess you couldn't really have it, the individual behavior or audience dashboards grayed out like that. Because if you clicked one, it would enable all of them, more or less, wouldn't it? Because as soon as you enabled that analytics connection. So
Mhm.
from a user's perspective, I guess it'd be a bit confusing having multiple dashboards turned on by one action when you are assuming that you're doing a singular action. Whereas with project
Yeah,
analytics, we're saying um, it's a feature that
product
we're enabling.
analytics.
Yeah, sorry, good point. I need to read now, but English. Um,
Yeah. No,
so
that
that'd
makes
be
sense to me. This seems a lot simpler. I like that approach better than doing it on a per dashboard sort of button.
yeah. I thought about other teams as well. And the only one I could really think of is Insights requires you to do some configuration because it's a custom dashboard, a custom report. So um, off the bat, from an optimized perspective, that was the only other one I could think of immediately that wouldn't just be shown, as it were, once they get that
Mhm.
in the listing. Um, these buttons, they could all say the same thing, but I just went to, I mean, the nomenclature can be decided upon.
Right.
The the problem with the first option is very much that uh, it gets complicated when you want to start doing pagination. So if we start getting quite a few dashboards on this, especially the custom dashboards, once you get to say 10 or 20 items, you'll probably want to start paginating for usability concerns. And then where do you put these? Do you put these at the end of that 20 item list on every page, or do you
Right.
put it at the end of the end of the end? And and if you start doing filtering on tags or whatever, if we ever have tags, um, it can get difficult. So although it's the simplest, 1 and 2 are definitely the simplest approach right now, they do have that midterm pitfall.
Got
Um,
it.
but it is simple and super straightforward, and keeps the features. Both of them keep the features front and center, so users know exactly what features they could set up. And the
Mhm.
same thing applies with this. It's just this is separating it out. So you do start to you don't you remove the concern around the pagination in a way because you can have that 20 item pagination here without
Mhm.
affecting the features. It also gives you a description, so you can and link ability to link off to further documentation. So it makes it can make it a little slightly clearer. Again, the nomenclature, inactive features. No idea if that makes sense from a product point of view.
Sure.
I
We
just put
can
words
tweak the
in.
wording later.
I put words in. Um, so this is sort of improving upon it. And again, it's in terms of implementation, this is about as complicated as the first option because we've already got the template, and all of these would just be statically, like manually added by us engineers, toggled.
Mhm.
All of them would be toggled on and off once, or shown or hidden based upon whether the feature is enabled or not, or set up. Each
And I'm
feature would have to
assuming for
figure
the
out what that
inactive
means to them.
feature, for the inactive feature section, I'm assuming we could just hide it completely once all features are enabled, right?
Yeah, I'd assume so. But again,
Okay.
so each feature is essentially owned by one group. So you would. I've just noticed my grays are 2 different grays. Apologies. Um, did not notice that. The It'd be up to each group to signify whether something is inactive or not to show or hide it. But then that overall would then lend itself towards having a check, which would just hide it if everything's enabled.
Got
Um,
it. Okay. Yeah, I
so
like that
that
one.
both of the 2 options though have one big issue, and that is and Jan might be able to phrase this better than me because he really did persuade me quite succinctly yesterday. Is that we are currently the listing is doing double duty. We are treating it as a list of dashboards as well as a way of of raising off or making our features more prominent to the user. We're making it do two separate tasks, more or less. It's not, in a way, and could get quite complicated as other groups start to make use of this listing. If they don't exactly like how it's laid out or how it's structured, because they don't. We also have a more broader thing around this whole custom dashboard system that we're setting up. This is almost like a template on what others can follow, especially with the dashboard working group, the whole dashboards principle that we're working towards in that working group. There's potential for people to deviate from the norm, or I'm trying. Jan, do you want to phrase it? I'm struggling.
Yeah, it's like I said, the more we thought about this, like in the mid to long term future, I guess the less viable like these solutions kind of seemed in terms of like the complexity about the multiple call to actions on the page. Like, how do we direct users to adding stuff? How do we highlight features that aren't enabled yet versus what they just want to use every single time? We brainstormed quite a lot of ideas, and I was just thinking, actually, like one thing that we can do for like option one to maybe make it easier as like a first iteration is actually just always have the inactive stuff at the top. But then it's also like the issue of like, okay, once we cross like a certain threshold, then that's going to become like cumbersome to users, because like the first 5 items on like every single dashboard listing is just going to be like grayed out unless like they have everything enabled.
You almost have to have a hide ability once you get to that point. And then the question is, why are we not just using banners that can be X'd out?
Exactly. So that's like a similar line of thinking that Rob and I was discussing. Like one of the first things that we brought up is like, okay, maybe it should be like setting sections so that you can hide. That's where the second option, like that idea came from. It's like, okay, this is something that could be toggled on and off. Like I said, like also when everything has been enabled, we can like remove this. And the third option is kind of like stemming from the idea that what we're kind of actually doing, well, what the user is actually doing, because like the dashboard and the designers are kind of shared across all analytics dashboards. What the users are really doing is adding a data source for queries. So that's where like the wording came in, like, okay, what they're actually adding is a data source, because it allows them to build visualizations using product analytics as a data source. The same way that if they set up insights, for example, they could build insight visualizations using that as a data source. And you could mix the two on the same dashboard. Because a data source is tied to a visualization, it is not tied to a dashboard. So you could have one dashboard querying multiple data sources. You could, if you wanted to, you could build like one mega dashboard that does like everything that you wanted to GitLab essentially. Not sure why you want to, but you know, that is something open to our power users. And that's where the thinking kind of came from, of like, then it's kind of starts becoming like a Kubernetes setup, or like setting up a group or a project using templates. And this gives us the freedom and like the scalability. It's not like the immediate most obvious thing, but I think that could be supplemented with like banners highlighting like what the top features are that we want to like push to users and show like, hey, you should activate these. But this flow is like scalable across like, you know, infinite amount of both listing and data sources, because I mean it's two different pages. We're not trying to compete like on one page.
No, that makes sense. And I like the fact that it splits those separate sort of workflows out into separate places. I think that makes it easier for users to follow. My only point of concern with this approach will be discoverability of additional data sources once you've configured your first one. Because the empty page makes it obvious, oh, I need to go do a thing. I'll go set up, say, product analytics, but how do I ever know about insights, or vice versa in that case. Because especially since we're going to be providing default dashboards, that means we either need to show them, but they're not functional or non-clickable in some way to hint people to go there, or we have to hope people go to data sources, configure it before we show them. And at that point, they won't even understand, like, oh, there was something here all along I could have done. Maybe we could noodle on how we might address that.
Yeah, we could also potentially do like a combination of like all three, where our primary call to action is always the add sources button. And then we can have deactivated list items showing like, hey, these are features that could be available. You just need to set up the data source for it or configure it. And the same for bringing an option to in terms of like highlighting features that are inactive or could be, but this could be done in a different way, also like a banner. So having a banner that, I don't know, ranks like the top 2 inactive features, or even if you've enabled the one feature, we can say like, hey, there's also insights, and it could be like dismissible or collapsible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I don't think that just showing the dashboard list grayed out necessarily makes sense. But I also could see if our inactive features list gets very long, if we run it back into the sort of scalability problems we're talking about now. I wonder if there's a way where we could put something to indicate that you have features that are not turned on somewhere on the page without fully listing it. And then maybe either when you click it or hover on it or interact with that in some way, it pops up and says, you know, product analytics, insights, etc., are not enabled. Add a data source to enable them, something like that. Probably something a little more prominent than an info bubble, but something like that.
It could also, now that I'm thinking about it, we could make like the top 2 or 3 list items the missing overall feature. Instead of saying, hey, you're missing the audience or the behavior dashboard, we could say like, this could be a product analytics dashboard. And that would immediately kind of make users think, oh, what's product analytics? Once they click on it, then it takes them through like the guide to be like, hey, this is product analytics, here's how you can set it up. So yeah, that's just a rough idea that I just had. So it's not like fully fleshed out yet.
So like as a line item, it would say product analytics dashboard, which would give into the data source flow. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think about like how to solve the issue of if we and Insights and every other like product group wants to add to this listing a bunch of like inactive stuff. Maybe it's better to like group it on the feature instead of saying this is the specific dashboard you could have. We could just say, hey, you could have product analytics enabled. And that is the grayed out item instead of having multiple. Like that at least reduces the list of like options in basically number 1.
Well, that's what I'm doing already.
Oh yeah, that is what you're doing. Sorry, but I do think that this is something that we could like push to the top. Is what I mean. Like as long as we keep it like to 2 to 3 items, and that's something that potentially will cause like a fight against like who's allowed to be in that list. But the same with banners. Like we have limited banner space, so it's like what are the features that we promote there?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I personally thought about maybe having this as like popular features, but then as Jan said, you run into the issue of politics, group politics, and group priorities clashing, causing issues because everyone wants their feature to be growing exponentially as much as they possibly can and hitting as many people. So that is the bit that would, having something like that, having a popular features list of a couple of items would probably solve that and keep it front and center, and we can always change it around if needed. But I don't understand politics, so that might be a terrible plan.
I don't think anyone does if they say they do, their lying. But we can also keep in mind, this is just for our first iteration, so we can keep this simple if we need to come up with something more complex for when we have, say, 30 items in this list, we should think about that today, but we don't necessarily have to solve it if it is super hard. I mean, we know we're going to have product analytics as one item that we have to do. Insights, I don't know if they actually have actual configuration that will be done, or if that's all baked into their actual dashboards. But I mean, we're talking about a maximum of 2 things for right now. So we could say whatever approach we want to pick supports up to 3, 5, some small amount of numbers, and then we need to, revisit this approach. I do see the logic on the data source approach, and I do like that. What if we had kind of a blending of number 1 and 3 in that case, then, where we have product analytics and insights potentially at the top of that list as the grayed out button, and you can click on those to enable them, and then also have the data source workflow there, so that if you don't want to click on a specific line item and you want to go into that actual data source workflow, you'd be able to do that. What would y'all think of that?
So are you saying that you'd put the grayed out at the top of the list rather than the bottom for starters, and then would they rather than having set up and configure or configure whatever it might be, it'd say add instead and take you to the data source page, or would it just take you off to the onboarding?
So put all that over here, have the data source button over here. Can you all see the annotation on the screen, by the way? Okay.
Yes.
I saw this was new and I really wanted to try it in some meeting, and this feels like the one to do it. So I was thinking do it, have these grayed out items at the top because we're going to be limited to either 1 or 2. Keep the button here or with the row items. If you click that, it takes you into the configuration specifically for product analytics, insights, whatever specifically there. Or if you click the data source button, that takes you to the same sort of configure any of the data sources options that are in option 3.
Yeah, I am personally for it. I think it makes a good first iteration. I do wonder though, if we then need the primary call to action, if our number of actions or call to actions that we have on the page is just going to be 1 or 2 for product analytics and insights. Because essentially what this page then does become that, hey, these are the unconfigured available features that you can enable. So it does then lead me to think about why then still have that separate page. It may be good just to have it there in terms of to guide our thinking and approach for how this is going to expand and grow in the future. But it is a kind of, it does become a P4, in terms of does the user need this for the first iteration? And my thinking is kind of no, especially if we push it to the top. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. What do you think, Rob?
I think that it's a valid concern. We also haven't on this list, because I was focused specifically on the CTA onboarding stuff, but we also are going to eventually need some kind of add a new dashboard button, probably on the list somewhere, either to link them off to documentation like the Kubernetes stuff does, or to explain how they add new dashboards, or to take them through to Query Designer, or whatever that ends up becoming on a broader scale. We will eventually need some way of showing a final, giving the user a call to action to add more than what they've got to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's potentially then going to compete with the setup data source call to action. I think
do we have a pattern for that already? Do any of our other listings like this ever use the bottom row as a add new sort of list, or anything else we could copy here, or do we need to invent something for this?
You mean adding a row, which is just add your own dashboard type link?
Yeah, exactly. So the bottom one just says create a new dashboard.
I want to say we have like a blue link in escalation policies, but that is more like a dynamic form than a taking off to a completely separate path. I feel like most of the time we would have a right-hand side call to action saying add dashboard, either is about along the same row as analytic dashboards or somehow integrated into the list.
Yeah, like on audit event headers, it makes sense to have a bottom row that you can quickly add because you're adding multiple list items in like a form. You're essentially growing the form. Because these are purely list items, I feel like having that top hand call to action would be the more expected place. That is
It's like
usually our
create new
pattern.
button in the upper right type thing.
Yeah. We could still have it like a split button with like a drop down for saying like, hey, you can also add a data source, but then it becomes hidden. But I do feel like a lot of the concerns that we have around how to handle pagination and everything does become far less if for the first iteration we just push these bottom items to the top and we just always keep them at the top as long as they stay like less than 3. As soon as we kind of hit more than that, then we need to kind of revisit this and think about, okay.
Which I think we can explicitly state like, hey, other groups, if you want to add something, we need to talk about it because we will break past 3. And I think that's fine.
Yeah, we can even make it as dirty as it is, like a code comment being like, you're adding to this list of constants. Please check out this issue before you do.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I mean that I think that's fine because this is super early days for us. So, this is where we can make small, boring iterations that we know are not necessarily going to be scalable for infinite users and infinite use cases, but we need to get to our first customer before we start solving for our millionth customer, right? So
Yeah. And pushing this to the top does help this. I do feel like with the first iteration we had where it was at the bottom, like one customer with just product analytics would already break it. But pushing it to the top was, I think it's completely doable for now, or workable.
Okay, well, so I took screenshots of Zoom and copied them in our document. So just to make sure I'm following, so the blue section around moving those to the top, we'll do that in one issue and do that as a first step. And then we'll do the create new green button. We'll do that in a follow-on issue. We're not proposing to do that right now, correct?
No, we don't have a create new flow yet, do we? We have the query designer, but it can't save anywhere. It's not necessarily tied. This is the query designer is tied to product analytics quite heavily right now, as far as I know. So we can't, just like with the instrumentation screen, where usually we have that button up here to take you back to the instrumentation page for product analytics, which I need to think about where we're going to put that now, because this is now a more generic list, not a product analytics list. So fun. I'm thinking that's going to go in configuration anyway, would be my guess. And maybe on an analytics dashboard itself. I don't know. So at least for the confirm, adding new dashboards button, that's something we can't really tackle yet, but we know we need to. Which is actually, I think, why we have the whole dashboards are created by editing the project dash files. Learn more here anyway to help explain what's happening. So hopefully that's enough for now. But all right, so we're going to go with option 1 for now. I'll move the gray to the top. I'll make those changes, and I will update this thread because I have involved Matei into the conversation and Haim as well. So I will do that this afternoon.
Awesome. Appreciate all the work on this, folks.
And with that, after that, if everyone gives the green light, then I will move this into you know, what's it called? That thing where we figure out how long it's going to take and what weight it's going to be, and now we're going to do it.
Planning
Yeah,
breakdown.
thank you.
Yeah.
Words.
Yep.
Appreciate that. I'll figure that out next.
We got there.
All right. Is there anything else anyone wants to talk about in this meeting?
I think I'm good. This was my main topic to go through.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. It's really helpful to like have a have a product person on the call, because yesterday Rob and I were just like talking about this as, you know, thinking about the engineering and the design, but we had a lot of questions about like, okay, what's going to work for the product and like GitLab as a whole. So thanks for adding that voice and guidance.
Yeah, happy to join in. It was fun.
All right, brilliant. Well, in that case, then, you guys get a minute back. Thank you all very much. See you next week. Have a good rest of your week. Ciao.
All right. Talk soon, folks. See ya.